They support policies that protect transgender athletes performing in women's sport. And I think that is madness. You're saying, well, because most of these things in this UN report were outside of America, it doesn't matter. It does matter.
Piers Morgan tried pulling his usual trick, stirring outrage over trans athletes and accusing Biden and Harris of backing madness. But David Pakman wasn't having any of it. In a debate that felt more like a public unmasking, Pakman calmly exposed every hole in Piers' argument, from fake gold medal scandals to cherry-picked outrage. After watching Piers scramble for answers he didn't have, you have to wonder, how much longer can this kind of cheap outrage even fool anyone? The debate between David Pakman and Piers Morgan kicked off exactly the way you'd expect, if you've ever seen Piers handle these topics before. He immediately leaned into his usual right-wing strategy, trying to frame trans issues in sports as some kind of massive national crisis. You know the move. Pull out a few extreme examples, sprinkle in some outrage about fairness, and act like it's the most urgent thing facing society today. Piers kept tossing out questions that were designed to trap or rattle his guest, a classic trick to make it look like the other side doesn't have good answers.
Well, the principle is you're saying Kamala Harris and Biden have come out in support of this.
They do. They support policies which actively protect.
But David Pakman wasn't falling for any of it. From the very beginning, you could tell he came prepared, calm, and completely ready to pick apart every weak argument Piers threw his way. Instead of getting defensive or emotional, the way Piers clearly hoped he would, Pakman stayed cool. He took each exaggerated point and calmly peeled back the layers, showing how little substance there really was underneath all the shouting. It wasn't just that Pakman disagreed, it was that he made it painfully obvious how flimsy and contrived the entire line of questioning was. When the topic shifted to trans athletes, Piers Morgan thought he had a winning hand. He started sounding the alarm about fairness in women's sports, trying to paint the whole situation as some kind of outrageous injustice. According to Piers, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were supporting madness by backing policies that protect trans athletes. He talked like this was a full-blown crisis that should have everyone losing sleep. You could hear it in his voice. He wanted this to be the moment where he trapped David Pakman into agreeing or looking weak. But Pakman wasn't even slightly rattled. He handled it the way you hope anyone would when faced with this kind of overblown outrage.
The vast majority of those instances in the UN report are outside the United States and have nothing to do with the president or vice president of the United States.
He calmly pointed out a pretty huge flaw in Piers' entire argument. Most of the examples Piers was dragging out were from a UN report that focused mostly on cases outside of the United States. In other words, the examples he was using to slam Biden and Harris didn't even come from the country they run. That alone would have been enough to make a lot of people pause, but Pakman didn't stop there.
I would challenge you to tell me the quotes that Biden or Harris have put forward wherein they have weighed in on how sports leagues should be handling these decisions.
He also called out the fact that neither Biden nor Harris had ever actually weighed in on how sports leagues should manage trans athletes. There were no big speeches, no executive orders, nothing official on the record about who should be allowed to compete where. Piers was making it sound like Biden and Harris had some massive agenda around sports policies, when in reality, they hadn't even stepped into the conversation in any serious way.
Really? So when you saw the Paris Olympics and you saw 2 gold medal winners in women's boxing who actually were born with biological male chromosomes, you think that's right?
Piers Morgan thought he had another big gotcha moment when he brought up 2 supposed gold medal winners who he claimed were biological males competing against women. He threw it out there with a lot of confidence, like it was some open and shut case of unfairness. But when David Pakman asked him a very simple question, who were the athletes? Everything started to fall apart. Piers couldn't answer. He stammered, tried to wave it off, and mumbled that the names didn't matter. It was one of those moments where you could feel the air getting sucked out of the room. If you're that outraged about something, you should at least know who you're talking about, right? Pakman didn't even need to raise his voice or get dramatic. He calmly pointed out exactly what everyone watching was already thinking. If you can't even name the athletes you're angry about, how serious is your outrage really? It was such a simple call-out, but it completely exposed how flimsy Piers' argument was. It showed that a lot of this so-called outrage isn't built on facts. It's built on vague headlines and second-hand rumours that fall apart the second you ask for actual details.
What's relevant is whether the gold medal winners have biological male chromosomes when they're getting into
My
a boxing
understanding
ring
is they do not.
and punching women in the face so hard that one of the women competitors, a female, quit after 45 seconds.
Trying to recover, Piers quickly switched gears and brought up a boxer who, he claimed, had been banned for having male chromosomes. He was clearly hoping this would somehow prove his point. But again, Pakman came prepared. He calmly explained the real story that the ban Piers was talking about came from a Russian lab. And not just any lab, but one tied to a competitor who had every reason to want that boxer disqualified. It wasn't some clear-cut case of wrongdoing. It was shady, politically motivated, and had been debunked by multiple investigations.
It's a completely contrived issue that almost no one cares about in every single opinion poll.
Wow. You see, I think that's incredibly deluded. People do care about it. They care about the integrity
It just
of
doesn't
women's
show up
sport.
in any opinion poll as a primary issue.
During the debate, David Pakman pulled out one of the simplest but most powerful moves of the whole conversation. He asked Piers Morgan a question that cut straight through all the noise. Does this even show up in a single major opinion poll? It was such a good moment because it forced everyone to take a step back and think about what matters to most people. And the honest answer? No, it doesn't show up. Not even close. Pakman was making a really important point. While Piers was trying to whip up outrage over trans athletes in sports, the reality is that average Americans are focused on real, everyday struggles. People are stressed about healthcare costs, about finding good jobs, about keeping up with rent and groceries when inflation keeps climbing. Those are the issues showing up again and again in polls. Not some edge case story about a handful of athletes in competitions that most people aren't even following. It was one of those moments where you could really see the difference between the two approaches. Piers was trying to manufacture a sense of urgency around a topic that, for the vast majority of voters, isn't even a blip on the radar. Pakman calmly reminded everyone that real political leadership should be about addressing the problems that actually impact people's lives. It's easy to stir up emotions with culture war stories, but it doesn't change the fact that when people walk into the voting booth, they're thinking about their bills, their families, and their futures, not who's competing in a college swim meet.
Well, you know what I'm talking about. It was well publicised.
Well, tell me who you're talking about.
I can't remember their exact names. There were 2 gold medal
I
winners.
Throughout the debate, Piers Morgan kept trying to fall back on the idea that this was all just basic common sense. Over and over again, he tried to frame the discussion around the idea that anyone with half a brain would see the situation the way he did. It's a tactic you see a lot when people want to shut down real conversations. Just slap the label of common sense on something and act like that ends the discussion. But David Pakman didn't let that slide for a second. Pakman calmly pointed out that pretending a trans participation in sports is a simple issue is not just lazy, it's downright dishonest. There are so many layers to this topic that trying to stuff it all into a neat little box labelled common sense completely misses the real-world complexity. Different sports have different standards and rules. What's fair in weightlifting might not be the same as what's fair in golf or track and field. Some sports already have policies based on things like hormone levels or transition timelines. It's not some one-size-fits-all situation where a quick slogan is enough. And then there's the science. Pakman made it clear that fairness and biology are complicated subjects. Researchers, medical professionals, and sports organisations have spent years trying to figure out how to balance inclusion and fairness. There's real debate, real nuance, and real disagreement, even among the experts. Acting like it's just a matter of common sense wipes all that away and turns a serious conversation into a cheap talking point. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.